I'll send the message to devotees.
They had a big bundle program in Calcutta. Prabhupada came back from Sydney to Calcutta.
Oh, he's coming to Calcutta, Sydney to Calcutta. From there, he's going to Moscow, right?
Yeah.
From Calcutta, he'll go to Moscow, isn't it?
Yes, Prabhupada.
So we will read from here, Prabhupada. Little bit we read from this, but we'll continue from here. June 1971. For months, Prabhupada had been planning to visit Moscow. Aside from his desire to preach to the Russian people, he had a specific meeting in mind with a Russian Indology professor, Ch.35. Professor Ch.35 headed the Department of Indian and South Asian Studies at Moscow's USSR Academy of Sciences, and Prabhupada had been corresponding with him for a year. Krishnadas in West Germany, with the help of a Dr. Bernhard of the University of Hamburg, had obtained the names of the other Russian scholars of Indology. A letter to Krishnadas in December of 1970 revealed Prabhupada's plans for preaching in Russia. I am very encouraged to see your enthusiasm for preaching this message to the Russian people, and your idea to send letters with the help of Dr. Bernard is very good. He's a big scholar and he also appreciates our movement. So if you arrange a tour of Russia for me, I'm prepared to accept. Let us see what Krishna desires. If we can go to Russia with our World Sankirtan party, I'm certain that it will be very much appreciated and people will see the real peace movement is chanting process. Chanting the holy names, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So try for it. Srila Prabhupada had coached Krishnadas on how to best cultivate the Russian Indologists. You can ask them some questions like, what is the ultimate goal of life? What is your ideal ultimate goal of life? What is the difference between animal and human life? Why is religion accepted by all kinds of civilized societies? What is your conception of the original creation? In this way, questions may put to find out what is their understanding. We do not grudge an atheist, provided he has got some philosophical standing. In this way, try to elicit some answers from the professors. If you can finally establish one Moscow center, it will be great credit to you. So far, studying Russian language is not necessary, but if you do so, it is all right. I want very much a center in Russia. So for the time being, I shall desire that Moscow center. In March 1971, Professor Ch.35 has replied to Krishnadas' letter. I thank you for information about Swami Bhaktivedanta's lecturing tour. If you would come to Moscow, the Soviet scholars doing research in ancient Indian culture would be very happy to meet him in the Institute of Oriental Studies, USSR Academy of Sciences. I would be thankful to you for your information on the dates of Swami Bhaktivedanta's arrival and stay in the USSR. Srila Prabhupada had personally replied to Professor Ch.35. It was understood that you and your university are interested in hearing about Krishna culture and philosophy. This ancient Krishna culture and philosophy, the oldest in the world or in the universe. At least from a historical point of view, it is not less than 5,000 years old. So now, plans. June 1971, it's time. Prabhupada has been planning to visit Moscow. He had a great desire to establish temple, and he was communicating Mr. Ch.35 for almost 1 year, under who is heading the Department of Indian and South Indian Studies. That's a very good catch. And I unbelievably, we see that how communists are so against about religion. They have actually polluted so many people's mind, especially in India. Also, we see, and now Krishnadas, he's from West Germany. He's desired to help preach in Russia, and Prabhupada appreciated. And he asked him, okay, he asked to prepare a tour for him, and he contacted. So now he gave him trick, because Russian people are atheist, many I believe. I don't know much, but atheist. So you can propose with their philosophy. You can ask questions. What is their understanding? So there will be thought-provoking questions which people have never asked. That's why Prabhupada has this book called Science of Self-Realization. I'm sure we will find these questions. This particular portion is, it should be thought-provoking question. So they will start thinking. And he said, I'm ready to go with World Sankirtan Party. And I'm certain that it will be very much appreciated, and people will see the real peace movement in chanting Hare Krishna. So he gave him some idea how to do. And Professor Kotonsky, when he heard that Swami Bhaktivedanta is going to come lecturing tour, he liked it. He said, please come. Now Prabhupada has responded to Mr. Kotonsky's letter that, in brief, it is 5,000 years old Krishna culture and philosophy. AJ?
Perhaps you may know that I have started this cultural movement since 1966, and it is already spreading all over the world. Krishna culture is so popular in India that even the government attracts many foreigners by Air India timetable to visit Vrindavan, the land of Krishna culture. Enclosed, please find one page from the latest Air India timetable, April 1971, wherein the Krishna culture is depicted for general attraction. My life is dedicated to spreading this Krishna culture all over the world. I think if you give me a chance to speak about the great Krishna culture and philosophy in your country, you'll very much appreciate this simple program with great profit. This culture is so well planned that it would be accepted by any thoughtful man throughout the whole world. Having preached a year in the Eastern Hemisphere, Prabhupada was eager to return to the West, and he planned to fly to Moscow and on to Europe. For Prabhupada and his traveling companions, Shamasundra and Aravinda, getting tourist visas for Russia was simple. They would take a 5-day government-controlled tour with every activity planned by the Soviet Tourist Bureau and everything paid for in advance. Captain Lal, the pilot of the flight to Moscow, considered Prabhupada an important passenger and came back to visit him during the flight. They spoke of Prabhupada's movement, his chances for lecturing in Moscow, and of Bombay, where Prabhupada was trying to purchase land. Captain Lal invited Prabhupada to the cockpit, and Prabhupada came and sat behind the captain, asking technical questions about the equipment and the flight. Prabhupada and Captain Lal agreed to meet again in Moscow. Prabhupada, his secretary, and his servant cleared Soviet customs and immigration quickly and smoothly, and a government tourist guide escorted them by limousine to the Hotel National. The hotel near Red Square, Lenin's tomb, and the Kremlin was expensive but plain. Prabhupada found his room dingy and cramped, with barely space for a bed and 2 chairs. The room for Shamasundra and Aravind was far away, and Prabhupada decided that Aravind should share the room with him instead, crowding Prabhupada's room all the more. Aravind told the hotel manager that he would not eat the hotel fare, but would have to cook their own meals. The manager refused at first, but finally allowed them to use the maid's kitchen. That problem solved, the next was getting food. Prabhupada sent Shamasundra out. Across the street, Shamasundra found a milk and yogurt store, but he returned to Prabhupada's room without any fruit, vegetables, or rice. Prabhupada sent him again, and this time Shamasundra was gone practically all day, returning only with a couple of cabbages. Prabhupada sent him out the next day for rice. When Shamasundra returned with rice after several hours, Prabhupada saw that it was poor North Korean variety, very hard. Prabhupada asked for fruit, but Shamasundra had to hike for miles through the city to find anything fresh, a few red cherries. So, Prabhupada was trying to get clearance for his trip to Russia and to Moscow, and the way he was doing that was, he said, look, I got this movement that I've started back in 1966, and it's spreading, and it's to the point where India is even using it, as an attraction to bring people to Vrindavan. You can find it listed in the Air India timetable saying, "Hey, come to Vrindavan, experience Krishna culture." So he says they figure out how they're going to get there, and he was going to go from Russia, from Moscow onto Europe, and in order for them to do it, it was everything is super controlled. So they would only be there for 5 days. The government would take them around to where they would want to go. Everything's planned, and everything's already paid for. So it's I don't know if you've ever seen that kind of experience in other countries.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, like they'll do that in North Korea, where they'll say, hey, they'll have journalists come in and essentially put them on a bus and just take them exactly where they want them to go and not let them see anything that they don't want them to see. It's how these communist countries maintain their image of superiority. So it's like, hey, here's all of our very nice buildings and all of our, very happy people. And then you go a block over and it's desolate slums and poverty. But they don't let you see that part. They only let you see the things that glorify the country. So Russia during communist time, well, still communist.
We just recently learned about, because all this happened in China. We were thinking even China also was very controlled, it seems.
Yep. Yeah, same. The communist government does that.
We are so fortunate Indians. We didn't have this kind of experiences.
Well, they were trying there, right? That's what the
yeah, they were trying. Until now, some of the states having this thing.
Yeah.
They're troubled. Prabhupada's place, yeah, that's the communist place.
Yep.
The West Bengal.
Yeah. But so they, he gets on the plane to Moscow, and he's talking to the pilot, and the pilot shows him everything and lets him sit in the cockpit, and Prabhupada's asking, all sorts of questions, kind of probably like a little kid, right? Getting to experience sitting in the cockpit with the pilot. And then, they say, hey, let's meet up at
special
privilege for him.
Yeah, privilege.
Yep. And then, so they get into Russia and they go to the hotel, and it's dingy and kind of gross, but very expensive. And Prabhupada, sends Shamsundar out to find food after they get permission to cook their own food in the maid's kitchen. And Shamsundar can't find anything. First, he comes back with just some milk. And then the next day he comes back with, a couple cabbages. And then after that, a little bit of North Korean rice, which apparently is not very good rice. And then after that, he has to go all the way through, to the other side of the city just to find some fresh fruit. So, it kind of paints a bleak picture of what Moscow was like at the time. You can really get a sense of just how much of a mess it was in terms of poverty and how they, how it was so government controlled and the communist culture in the country.
That is due to poverty. I was wondering why they won't find.
Poverty and the government controls everything. So, if it's hard to get. People were standing on bread lines and things just to get, bare necessities back then.
I heard that, but I thought Russia was a very economically very advanced, technologically very advanced place.
They have oil, and that's kind of they have gas and oil, and that kind of keeps them going. But all of those funds, all that money is situated at the very top, and it never really makes its way down to everybody else. It's not as bad as it was. My understanding is it's not as bad now as it was then, right? But it's still not a great place.
I mean, it's really hellish place. You won't get little fruits. You won't get milk. You won't get vegetables. You won't get rice. Prabhupada told in one lecture, actually, if I remember. Yeah, Shamsundar had to spend so much of time just to get a little rice. They won't find it. That's why one devotee was sharing when first time Russians came to Mayapur. I mean, they had a kind of a tears in their eyes. That's what devotees were sharing. Those. So they have never experienced such kind of food and everything, prasad and everything. So Mayapur is a lot of houses are dominated by Russian devotees now, right? And that's good. At least they appreciate after going through difficult times. Cycling Prabhu, is it?
Hare Krishna. Prabhupada remained peaceful and regulated, keeping to his daily schedule. He would rise early and translate, and in the cool of the early morning, he would go out for a walk through the all but deserted streets. Prabhupada, wearing a saffron chadara, strode quickly. Samasundara sometimes running ahead to photograph him. As they would pass Lenin's mausoleum, a queue would already be forming. Just see, Prabhupada commented one morning, that is their God. The people don't understand the difference between the body and the spirit. They accept the body as the real person. Prabhupada appreciated the sparseness of the traffic, some trolleys and bicycles, but mostly pedestrians. As he walked among the old ornate buildings, he saw elderly women hosing the wide streets. A good practice, he said. The Russian people appear to live structured, regulated lives more so than the Americans. These simple, austere people, unspoiled by the rampant hedonism so common in America, were fertile for Krishna consciousness. But devoid of spiritual sustenance, they appeared morose. Prabhupada had Samasundara arrange a meeting with Professor Kotovsky and invite Captain Lal to come along. The tourist bureau provided a car and guide. Prabhupada and his party rode outside the city to Professor Kotovsky's office in an old wide brick building at the Academy of Sciences. When Prabhupada arrived, the middle-aged Russian professor, dressed in a grey suit, got up from his cluttered desk and welcomed Prabhupada into his small office. Professor Kotovsky appeared a bit hesitant, however more cautious than in his letters. When Syamasundara mentioned Prabhupada's eagerness to lecture before interested scholars at the academy, Professor Kotovsky flatly refused. It would never be allowed. Prabhupada was disappointed. The next moment, however, Prabhupada seemed unaffected and began speaking in his humble, gentle manner, sitting in a straight-backed office chair besides Professor Kotovsky, who sat at his desk. Syamasundara turned on the tape recorder, which the professor eyed cautiously but didn't object to. Prabhupada, the other day I was reading the paper, Moscow News. There was a communist congress and the president declared that we are ready to get others' experiences to improve. So I think the Vedic concept of socialism or communism will much improve the idea of communism. Professor Kotovsky listened intently and politely as a foreign visitor explained how the Grihastha in the Vedic culture provides for everyone living in this house, even for the lizards, and how before taking his meal, he calls in the road to invite any hungry person to come and eat. In this way, Prabhupada explained, there are so many good concepts about the socialist idea of communism. So I thought that these ideas might have been distributed to some of your thoughtful men. Therefore, I was anxious to speak. So, Prabhupada basically, even there, he kept to his daily schedule. He got up in the morning for his walk and he would also translate. And Syamasundara would take some photographs of Prabhupada and they would pass through the Lenin's mausoleum. And Prabhupada would see that all the people who are forming a queue they think that that particular body is God. They don't understand the difference between the body and spirit. And he also appreciated the simple living, like it is not basically not much traffic, only some bicycles and mostly pedestrians. He saw the women were hosing the wide streets and like the simple living. He said there's not that the modernization or westernism that he found in America, it was not there in Russia, and he felt that because they were simple, they were fertile for Krishna consciousness. But again, because they did not have any spiritual activity, basically they all appeared very dull. And Prabhupada had Syamasundara arrange a meeting with Professor Kotovsky and Captain Lal, and they went to the Russian professor's house, which was outside the city. When Prabhupada asked, when Syamasundara mentioned Prabhupada's eagerness to lecture before the scholars at the academy, the professor flatly refused. He said that will never be allowed. Prabhupada was disappointed, but again, he began speaking in a humble and gentle manner, talking talking about what he saw in the news the other day, where there was a news saying that the Congress, which is communist, is trying to get other experiences to improve. And Prabhupada says that this Vedic concept of socialism or communism will improve the idea of communism. And he also says that in the Vedic culture, the Grihastha is the head of the family. He provides for everyone in the family. And before taking his meal, he goes to see if there's any hungry person and invites them to come and eat. So in this way, he says that there are many good concepts about this communism, socialist idea of communism that can be distributed among the thoughtful people there.
Just like he specified the communist gundas in Calcutta program, Pandal program. So now he used that same, actually Krishna consciousness is spiritual communism. But in Nectar of Sri Upanishad, we will see how he, he chastises about both capitalist and communist, because they don't keep Krishna at the center. That's why they get into all these troubles. Okay, who else? Yeah, I think Pranako, you can read.
Krishna Prabhu, can I read in 2 minutes?
Okay, yeah.
Next. Thank you.
Yeah, Nipa, you please read.
Professor Katowski's academic interest was piqued. You know, it is interesting, he said. His articulate English heavily accented. As it is here in our country, there is now great interest in the history of old thought. He described the accomplishments of his colleagues and himself, particularly a booklet they had recently prepared highlighting Soviet studies in Indology. He said he would like to give a copy to Prabhupada. Professor Katowski, you will be interested to discover that we published not all but some Puranas, then some parts of the Ramayana, 8 volumes in Russian of the Mahabharata, and also a second edition of Mahabharata translated by different people and full and published. Manusmriti is also translated and full and published with Sanskrit commentaries. And such was the great interest that all of these publications were sold in a week. They are now completely out of stock. It is impossible to get them in the book market after a month. Such a great interest among reading people here in Moscow and the USSR towards ancient Vedic culture. Prabhupada, among these Puranas, the Srimad Bhagavatam is called the Mahapurana, and he told of his own translation of Srimad Bhagavatam, the ripened fruit of the Vedic desire tree. He would show some volumes to the professor if he was interested. Professor Katowski said the Moscow and Leningrad libraries had nearly all the major texts of Indian culture in Sanskrit. These libraries housed not only ancient texts but more recent literature as well, comprising an up-to-date study of Hinduism. Prabhupada interrupted, is a very complex topic, and they both laughed. Professor Katowski acknowledged that Hinduism was more than a religion, it was a way of life. But Prabhupada explained that the name Hindu was actually a misnomer. The real term to explain Vedic culture was Varnasram. Briefly, Prabhupada described the 4 orders Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Professor Katowski, you have told that in any society there are 4 divisions, but it is not so easy to distinguish. For instance, one can group together different social classes and professional groups into 4 divisions in any society. There is no difficulty. The only difficulty is, for instance, in a socialist society, in our country and other socialist societies. How can you distinguish productive group and workers? A little one. So Professor Katowski's interest was piqued, and he said, "It's interesting." He said, his articulate English heavily was accented, and he mentioned that it is in our country that now there is a great interest in the history of old thought. He went on to describe the accomplishments of himself and colleagues, particularly booklet highlighting Soviet studies and Indology. He said he would also like to give a copy to Prabhupada. Professor Katowski says to Prabhupada, you will be interested to discover the published, like that we published, not all, but some Puranas and some parts of Ramayana, Mahabharata, second edition of Mahabharata translated and pruned. Manusmriti is also translated and published with Sanskrit commentaries, and such was the great interest. They were now completely out of stock, he said. It is impossible to get them in book market after a month. And such great interest among reading people here in Moscow and USSR towards ancient Vedic culture. Prabhupada mentioned among these Puranas, the Srimad Bhagavatam is also called like the Mahapurana, and uh, he told of his own translation of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is described as the ripened fruit of the Vedic desire tree. And he would show some volumes to the professor if he was interested. Professor Katowski said Moscow and Leningrad libraries had all the text of Indian culture in Sanskrit, and these libraries housed not only ancient texts but recent current literature as well, comprising up-to-date study of Hinduism. And then came the topic of Hinduism. Prabhupada interrupted and said it is a very complex topic, and they both started laughing. Professor Katowski acknowledged that Hinduism is not just only about religion, it is a way of life. And Prabhupada explained the name Hindu was a misnomer and explained that Vedic culture was Varnashram. And Prabhupada briefly went on to explain the four orders of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Professor Katowski said, you have told that in any society there are four divisions, but it is not easy to distinguish. For instance, one group together can group together different social classes and professional groups in four divisions in any society. There's no difficulty, but there is difficulty in socialist society in our country, and the socialist society can distinguish between productive group and workers.
Prasanthi.
Prabhupada welcomed the professor's questions. Although grounded in Soviet socialist vested interests, Prabhupada considered the professor not so much an academician as a pawn of the Soviet university system, much as one political power tries to understand its adversary. The professor was inquiring into Indian culture so that his government might penetrate it with their own ideology. Behind Professor Kotowski's apparent interest in Vedic culture, Prabhupada could see the view of the Communist Party, a view diametrically opposed to Vedic philosophy. Nevertheless, Prabhupada tactfully continued to present Krishna consciousness in accord with Parampara, and he tried to convince Professor Katowski through scripture and logic. Quoting Bhagavad Gita, a Shastra with which a professor was familiar in his own way, Prabhupada described Lord Krishna as the creator of the four divisions of the society. Professor Katowski immediately countered with the theory of the Soviet scholars that the Varnashrama divisions were a recent addition to the Vedic culture. He also again registered his opinion that the divisions of the Varnashrama had no meaning with socialism. Professor Katowski, there is a great distinction between socialist society and all societies preceding socialism. Because in modern Western society, you can group all the social and professional classes in the particular class divisions, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, or factory owners, and Shudras, or menial workers. But here we have no Vaishyas, because we have administrative staff in factories, managerial staff, and you can call them Kshatriyas, and then Sudras, the workers themselves, but not this intermediate class. Prabhupada, that is stated, Kalau Shudra Sambhava. In this age, practically all men are Shudras. that is stated. But if they are simply Sudras, then the social order will be disturbed. In spite of your state of Sudras, the Brahmanas are there. That is necessary. So, if you do not divide the social order in such a way that it will be chaos, that is the scientific estimation of Vedas. You may belong to Sudra class, but to obtain the social order, you have to train some of the Sudras to become Brahmanas. It cannot depend on Sudras. Rebuji, I will explain, but maybe you can add more.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This is done, right? Yeah, this is here. I think here, right?
Yes, yeah. So Prabhupada welcomed the question posed by the professor. So he has his own agenda. So his questions are coming from the socialistic point of view, from his own government. So Prabhupada was aware of that, and he is tactfully presenting the Krishna consciousness and its parampara to him, and trying to convince with scripture and logic. And he explains that in Bhagavad Gita, which is the Shastra, um, he explains that Krishna is the creator, and he explains that there are 4 divisions in the society, and immediately Katowski countered, saying that Varnashrama divisions are recently added to the Vedic culture; they are not there before. And Katowski also says that there is no Vaishyas right now. In their country, they only have Kshatriyas and Sudras, but the intermediate class is not present. And Prabhupada explains that according to Shastras, right now in Kali Yuga, only Shudras are there, but Brahmanas are very much necessary. So some of the Shudras can be trained to become Brahmanas.
You did a good job. Nice. That's the fact. Because first of all, they are mentioning, they are translating everything with mental speculation without any guru and authority. They have a lot of interest in Russia, looks like, but they don't have authorized book. And here, the Shastras, you must learn from the bona fide teachers. So that's why neither they have understanding that God exists, and about Varnashrama system, it's all speculation they are thinking. And now they are comparing this society with Varnashrama system, the current situation. But current system is chaos because there are no divisions. There is no division. So Prabhupada said, first you have to create the head. Unless you create the head, there won't be any progress. So I think you covered well, very good. Okay, Pranath, you want to read now?
Yes, Prabhu. Prabhupada gave a standard analogy comparing the social body to the human body. All the parts are necessary, not only the legs, but the belly, the arms, and the head. Otherwise, he said, it will not work properly. As long as this is going on, there will be some disturbance. Modern society's missing point, Prabhupada said, was an understanding of the purpose of human life. They do not know what is the next life, he said. There is no department of knowledge or scientific department to study what is there after finishing this body. Professor Kotovsky objected politely, completely. Swamiji, he said, when the body dies, the owner also dies. Prabhupada marked his reply. No, Prabhupada quickly replied. This fact you must know. Why is there no department of knowledge in the university to study this fact scientifically? That is my proposition. That department is lacking. It may be as you say, it may be as I say, but there must be a department of knowledge. Now, recently, a cardiologist, a doctor in Montreal and Toronto, has accepted that there is a soul. I had some correspondence with him. He strongly believes that there is a soul. Prabhupada continued to build his argument. We accept knowledge from authority. The professor countered that everything had to be accepted on the basis of empirical evidence. But then, in mid sentence, he stopped arguing and inquired, have you many branches of your society in the world? Prabhupada began speaking about ISKCON with its 65 branches all around the world, and of how he was going next to Paris, where his disciples had recently acquired a new center, and of how the American boys and girls, especially, were joining his movement. He told of the 4 prohibitive rules: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, and no gambling, and of the books he had published. As Prabhupada described the workings of his movement, Professor Kotovsky nodded approvingly. When Prabhupada returned to comparing Krishna consciousness to communism, he concluded that the two philosophies were in agreement and both stressed surrender to an authority. The devotee surrenders to Krishna, the communist to Lenin. So, here Prabhupada was comparing the human body to the social body, and it's like all parts of the body are necessary for the body to function. Uh, um, um, and he said that the modern society is missing this point about the understanding of the human life, purpose of human life, and what happens after this life, and that there must be a department set up in the universities to systematically study this knowledge of the soul, and to study what happens after this body is finished. And Prabhupada was explaining that recently he talked to a cardiologist in Canada, and he accepted that he strongly believed that there is soul. And Prabhupada built more arguments that primarily that we accept knowledge from authority, and the Professor Kotovsky was countering everything, but then he eventually stopped and inquired about how many centers or branches this ISKCON had, and Prabhupada began speaking about ISKCON, the 65 branches at that time, which were all over the world, and how he was going to Paris for the new center, and um, then how a lot of American boys and girls were joining the movement, and we mentioned about the 4 regulative principles of no meat eating, no gambling, no intoxication, no illicit sex, of the books he had published up to that point, and also all the activities or what all was happening in the movement, and the Professor Kotovsky was acknowledging and approving, or in the sense agreeing, accepting all that Prabhupada was saying. And Prabhupada then got back to the primary point of comparing Krishna consciousness to communism, where in both the philosophies you have to surrender to an authority, and that as devotees we surrender to Krishna, and then the communist to Lenin, as Prabhupada concludes.
Very nice. Srikar?
Prabhupada, our life is by surrender, is it not? Do you disagree with this point? Kotovsky, to some extent, you surrender. Prabhupada, yes, to the full extent. Kotovsky, you have to surrender to the society, for instance, the whole people. Prabhupada, yes, to the whole people, or to the state, or king, or government, or whatever you say. The surrender must be there. It may be different. Kotovsky, the only difficulty is we cannot have surrender to government or to a king. The principal difference is of surrender to a king who is a single person or to a whole society. Prabhupada, no, that is a change of color only, but the surrender is there. The principle of surrender is there. Whether you surrender to monarchy, democracy, aristocracy, or dictatorship, you have to surrender. That is a fact. Without surrender, there is no life. It is not possible. So we are educating persons to surrender to the Supreme, wherefrom you get all protection. Just like Krishna says, Sarvadharman Parityaja. So surrender is there. No one can say, no, I'm not surrendered to anyone. The difference is where he surrenders. And the ultimate surrendering object is Krishna. Therefore, in Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Bahunam, Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate. After surrendering to so many things, birth after birth, when one is factually wise, he surrenders unto me. Professor Kotowski is agreed, but surrender has to be accompanied by revolution, he said. The French Revolution, for example, was a revolt against one kind of surrender, and yet the revolution itself was another surrender, surrender to the people. So it is not enough to come full stop. The professor argued, surrender is to be accompanied with revolt against surrender to other people. So here we see Prabhupada and Professor Kotowski going back and forth, and then Srila Prabhupada says like how life means surrender. And then when Kotowski says, yeah, maybe to some extent we have to surrender. Prabhupada says, no, not to some extent, to full extent. Then again, Professor Kotowski says that, no, you have to surrender to society, for instance, the whole people. Then Prabhupada says, yes. So it doesn't matter. You are now surrendering to whole people or a state or a king or government, whatever it may be. But that surrender is there. The principle of surrender is there, but it may be different. That's all. And then again, here Professor Kotowski says that again he points out the difference. Like surrendering to a government is different from surrendering to a king. And then Prabhupada says, no, that is just a difference in color only. But actually the surrender, the principle of surrender is there everywhere, whether that is to a single person or to a huge society. So whether we surrender to a normal monarchy, democracy, aristocracy, dictatorship, whatever it may be. But the surrender principle is there, and that is a fact. And without surrender, there is no life, and it is not possible. And then that's what we are educating. I mean, in Krishna consciousness, that we have to surrender to the Supreme Lord, Krishna, from whom we get all the protection. And even Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, Sarvadharman Parityajya. So surrender is always there, and then nobody can say that no, I'm free. I'm not surrendering to anybody else. Only that there is a difference at whom we are surrendering to. Some people surrender to a single person, to a state, or different. That's all. So, and the ultimate surrendering object is Krishna. So that is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that after surrendering to so many things, birth after birth, one finally who is wise, he surrenders onto the Supreme Lord, Krishna. So Prabhupada explains this to Professor Kotowski. Again, Professor, he agreed, but then again he says that the surrender must be accompanied by revolution. And then he quoted example of French Revolution, where there was a revolution against one kind of surrender. But again, if you see, I mean, from a bigger picture, revolution itself is surrendering to a bigger group, agreeing to a group that to revolt against another, something else. So Professor says that we cannot come to a full stop. And then again, Professor, he again argues that surrender has to be always accompanied with a revolt against another surrender.
Okay. Kotowski, it stops. Okay. Prabhupada, yes, the surrender will be full stop when it is surrender to Krishna. That is full stop, no more surrender. Other surrender you have to change by revolution. But when you come to Krishna, then it is sufficient, you are satisfied. Just like, I give you one example. A child is crying and people change laps. Oh, it has not stopped. But as soon as the baby comes to the lap of its mother, Kotowski, it stops. Prabhupada, yes, full satisfaction. So this surrender, the changes will go on in different categories. The sum total of all these surrenders is surrender to Maya, material illusion. But the final surrender is to Krishna, and then you will be happy. After only 3 days, Prabhupada's mission in Moscow seemed finished. The meeting with Professor Kotovsky over. What was left? The government would allow nothing else. It had not allowed him to bring in books, and now he had been refused the opportunity to speak publicly. Foreigners were not to talk with the Russians. He could go nowhere unless on an accompanied tour. So, with no preaching and no prospects, he stayed in his cramped room, taking his massage, bathing, accepting whatever food Shyamasundara could gather and cook, dictating a few letters, chanting Hare Krishna, and translating Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada took a guided tour of Moscow, riding with other tourists on a crowded bus. He saw elderly Russians going to church, armed guards stationed at the door. He soon tired of the tour, however, and the tour guide got him a taxi and instructed the driver to return him to the Hotel National. Prabhu, I'll just summarize. Prabhupada here says that if we surrender to Krishna, then that will be the full surrender. I mean, it will be stopped. There will be no surrender, and other surrenders will have to be
final surrender.
Final surrender. Yeah, and other surrender should be. It will be by. I mean, it will come by change and revolution. So when we surrender to Krishna, then we will be satisfied. And Prabhupada gives one example that when a child is crying and people change laps, the child doesn't stop. But when the baby comes to the lap of its mother, then Kotovsky says that it will stop. So Prabhupada again says, yes, that is called full satisfaction, and that is the surrender. And other than surrendering to Krishna, whatever surrenders are being done, that is the surrender to Maya, and the final surrender is to Krishna. Then only one will be happy. So after 3 days, Prabhupada's mission in Moscow seemed finished, and the meeting with professor was over, and he was asking what was left. And the government is also allowing nothing to do, and it had not allowed him to bring the books, and also they refused to speak publicly, and foreigners were not talking with Russians, so he couldn't go anywhere unless on an accompanied tour. So he stayed in his room, and he was just taking his massage, bathing, and accepting whatever food Shyamasundara used to gather and cook. And he used to dictate a few letters and then chant Hare Krishna and then translate Srimad Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada took a guided tour to Moscow with other tourists in a crowded bus. So he saw some Russians going to a church with some armed guards stationed at the door. And then he was tired during the tour, and the guide instructed him to go in a taxi. And he instructed the driver to return him to the Hotel National.
Nice, thank you. Those who want to see a video, a lot of plays were done. It's called Salted Bread. Anyone has watched Salted Bread? I'm sure many may not have done, but I will share. We have very nice videos was made. What a difficulties in Russians devotees has gone through to establish Krishna consciousness there. Now it is finally flourishing. So Salted Bread, you can see. Shyam Sundar continued to spend most of his days cooking for fresh food. Hearing that oranges were available at a certain market across town, he set out across the city. With his shaved head and his white dhoti and kurta, he drew stares from everyone he passed. And as he was returning after dark, uninformed man wearing red armbands accosted him, taking him to be a local deviant. Grabbing him, they pinned his arms, behind his back and shouted at him in Russian. Samson caught the word document passport. He replied, document, hotel. Realizing Samsundar was a tourist, the officers released him and he returned to the hotel and informed Prabhupada of what had taken place. There is no hope in Russia without Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada said. Once, Samsundar was standing in line at the yogurt store when a man behind him asked him about yoga. I really want to talk with you, the man said, and he gave Samsundar his name and address and a time they could safely meet. When Samsundar told Prabhupada said, no, he's a policeman, don't go. Oh, interesting. Prabhupada, wow, I would have gone with you. One day, two young men, one the son of an Indian diplomat stationed in Moscow, the other a young Muscovite, were loitering near the Red Square when they saw an amazing sight. After the usual regimented routine of city traffic, a tall young man had a shaved head and a long reddish ponytail and flowing white robes approached. It was Shyamsundar. Familiar with Shyamsundar's dress, the son of the Indian diplomat stopped him. Shyamsundar smiled, Hare Krishna, brother. And he began talking with the Indian, whose name was Narayan. The Russian even knew a little English and followed the conversations as closely as he could. The talk grew serious. Why don't you come up and meet my spiritual master? Shyamsundar asked. Honored, the boys immediately accompanied Shyamsundar to the Hotel National. Now, when they arrived, they found Prabhupada seated on his bed, aglow and smiling. Aravinda massaging his feet. Shyamsundar entered, offering obeisances before Prabhupada. Even was completely fascinated. That's interesting. So he was looking for going, looks Shyamsundar Prabhu has gone with dhoti and shaved head. So is Prabhupada also, saffron and both saffron and white. So people are seeing everybody's looking at his dress, and these people, uniform man, the police has caught him, and it's surprising how they can catch him like that. Pinned his arms behind his back. You allowed to enter the country, now you punish them, huh? That's amazing. So he has documents, so they understood he's a tourist, and so they released him. So Prabhupada says there is no hope for Russians, it's only Krishna consciousness can help. So the other time he was standing on the yogurt store, and here, one yogurt store, and the man behind is asking, I want to learn about yoga. Prabhupada says that no, don't go. He's a policeman. And, what do you think? Now, how Prabhupada could guess that? When you go for a particular purpose, you're desperate. Wow, you got somebody to preach. And now Prabhupada immediately said he's a policeman. So he knows Krishna is in his heart, and he knows what's happened. That's amazing. That is a policeman. So anyway, so then he on the road, the two kids two boys, they see Shyamsundar Prabhu, and with familiarity they see his dhoti and his smile. They had a talk, very nice talk, and finally he took him to me introduced to Prabhupada, and even was completely fascinated to see the scene, offering obeisance. It's completely new culture to them. Ajay, you can do it.
Come on, Prabhupada said, and the three of them sat at Prabhupada's feet. Turning first to Narayana, Prabhupada asked his name and his father's occupation. Narayana liked Prabhupada and offered to bring him green vegetables. His father, being highly placed at the Indian embassy, had produce flown in from India. Ivan was interested even more than his Indian friend, and Prabhupada began explaining to him the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, while Narayana helped by translating. Ivan inquired with respect and awe, and Prabhupada answered his questions, teaching as much basic information about Krishna consciousness as was possible in one sitting. Prabhupada explained the differences between the spirit, soul, and the body, and described the soul's eternal relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He spoke of Bhagavad Gita, of his network of temples around the world, and of his young men and women disciples all practicing bhakti yoga. Prabhupada mentioned his desire to preach in Russia, which was a great field for Krishna consciousness because the people were open-minded and hadn't been polluted by sense gratification. He wanted to introduce Krishna consciousness literature in Russia through a library or a reading room, or in whatever way possible. Krishna conscious philosophy, he said, should be taught to Russia's most intelligent people, but because of government restrictions, it would have to be done discreetly. Devotees would not be able to sing and dance in the streets, but they could chant quietly together in someone's home. Prabhupada then began singing very quietly, leading the boys in kirtan. So, he was talking, the boys came upstairs and they were meeting with Prabhupada, Ivan and Narayana. And while Narayana was interested, Ivan was like way into it and was asking questions and Prabhupada could sense that and was really giving him as much info as he could at that time. And when Narayana would translate for him, and he told him about the difference between spirit, soul, and body, and your soul's relationship with Krishna, and about the Gita, and about all the temples and what what Prabhupada's disciples were up to. And then Prabhupada started talking to Ivan about how he wants to preach in Russia and how it's important to, and I think his rationale is interesting, right? Because the people were open-minded and hadn't been polluted by sense gratification, which I think is a result of the abject poverty that they were facing, right? And the conditions, they had nothing, so they wanted for, what I mean? They didn't want it, they didn't have it, they didn't know any better. But so he said he wanted to, somehow get his literature, Krishna conscious literature out. And he was saying, hey, you guys can't chant in the streets, you can't sing in the streets, but there's nothing stopping you from getting together and chanting quietly at your house and or at somebody's home. And then, Prabhupada did just that, doing, leading a very quiet kirtan for the boys then.
I am kind of lost where this one, right?
At Ivan's one. Yeah, Ivan's taking to Krishna. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. His father, the Indian man's father, he gets vegetables from India. Did you see that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were flown in.
I think he's flown vegetables from India, flown flight. What happened was that? Okay. Cyclone, you can read.
Ivan's taken to Krishna was like a hungry man's eating a meal. After several hours, he and his friend had to go. They would return the next day. Samsundar began spending time with Ivan and Narayana. Ivan, a student of Oriental philosophies, was very intelligent and eager to know what was going on in the outside world. He was fond of the Beatles, and Prabhupada told him of his association with George Harrison and John Lennon. Ivan and Samsundara had long talks about the ambitions and hopes of young people outside Russia. And Samsundara explained to him how Krishna consciousness was the topmost of all spiritual paths. Samsundara also taught him basic principles of bhakti yoga, such as chanting the prescribed 16 rounds of japa daily, and gave him his own copy of Bhagavad Gita as it is. Prabhupada showed Ivan how to prepare chapatis and rice and asked him to give up eating meat. Joyfully, Ivan accepted the chanting, the new way of eating, everything. Ivan was being trained so that after Prabhupada left, Ivan could continue on his own. Ivan would be able to feel himself changing and advancing in spiritual life, and after practicing for some time, he could be initiated. Ivan said he could tell his friends about Krishna consciousness. With only 2 days left in Moscow, Prabhupada taught Ivan as much as he could. In this young Russian's eagerness and intelligence, Prabhupada found the real purpose of his visit to Russia. Prabhupada gave the analogy that when cooking rice, the cook needed test only one grain to determine whether the whole pot of rice is done. Similarly, by talking with this one Russian youth, Prabhupada could tell that the Russian people were not satisfied in their so-called ideal land of Marxism. Just as Ivan was keenly receptive to Krishna consciousness, millions of other Russians would be also. So here, Ivan was taken to Krishna consciousness like an hungry man eating a meal, and they would come back the next day. He would spend time with Shyamasundar. Ivan was a student of philosophy, and he was very intelligent, and he wanted to know what was going on. He was fond of the Beatles, and Prabhupada told him that he had known George Harrison and John Lennon. And Ivan and Samsundara had long talks. Samsundara explained to him about Krishna consciousness, about that how it was the topmost path, and taught him basic principles of Bhakti Yoga, chanting the 16 rounds daily, and gave him his copy of Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada also was training Ivan about like cooking like rice and chapatis. I asked him to give up meat, which he joyfully did. He accepted the chanting, and he was being trained so that he could continue on his own. And with only 2 days left before Prabhupada leaves Moscow, he taught Ivan as much as he could. And he found in Ivan the real purpose of his visit to Russia. And Prabhupada gives the analogy that when cooking rice, if you just test one grain, you know if the whole rice is cooked. And similarly, by talking to Ivan, Prabhupada could tell that the Russian youth would be ready for Krishna consciousness, and they were not satisfied in the land of the communism.
Santi?
Chanakya Pandita says that one blooming flower can refresh a whole forest, and that a fire in the single tree can burn the whole forest. From the Marxist point of view, Ivan was the fire that would spread Krishna consciousness to others, thus defeating the communist ideology. And from Prabhupada's point of view, he was an aromatic flower that would lend its fragrance to many others. Prabhupada's visit to Russia was no obscure interlude, but had become an occasion for planting the seed of Krishna consciousness in a destitute land. Srila Prabhupada had brought the movement of Lord Chaitanya to yet another country. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself had predicted that the Sankirtana movement would go to every town and village, yet for hundreds of years. That prediction had remained unfulfilled. Prabhupada, however, in the few years since his first trip to America in 1965, had again and again planted Lord Chaitanya's message in one unlikely place after another. And of all places, this was perhaps the most unlikely. During a brief government-supervised visit to Moscow, he had planted the seed of Krishna consciousness within the Soviet Union. He was like the needle, and everyone and everything connected with him was like the thread that would follow. Professor Kotowski had remarked that Prabhupada's stay in an old-fashioned hotel would not prove very interesting, but Prabhupada, unknown to Professor Kotowski, was transcendental to Moscow or any other place in the material world. Prabhupada had come to this place, and Krishna had sent a sincere soul to him to receive the gift of Krishna consciousness. This had happened not by devious espionage against the Soviet government, but by the presence of Krishna's pure devotee and his natural desire to satisfy Krishna by preaching. In response to Prabhupada's pure desire, Krishna had sent one boy, and from that one boy, the desire would spread to others. Nothing, not even an iron curtain, could stop Krishna consciousness. The soul's natural function was to serve Krishna, and Krishna's natural will was to satisfy the pure desires of his devotee. Chanakya Pandita says, one blooming flower can refresh the whole forest. And in the same way, if a single tree is burned, the whole forest can also be burned. So likewise, Ivan was the fire who will spread the Krishna consciousness, to the whole community. He was like, according to Prabhupada, he was like a fragrant flower who will lend its fragrance to others. And he is the seed. And Prabhupada planted the seed of Krishna consciousness in him. And Prabhupada had bought this Sankirtana movement to Moscow. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu already predicted that Sankirtana movement would go to every town and village, but it did not happen for so long. Because of Prabhupada, it started happening very quickly. And and they did not do any espionage or anything. They did not break any laws, but Krishna himself provided the boy, and Prabhupada planted the seed of Krishna consciousness in the Soviet Union through him. So now that chain will continue, the thread will continue. And as Prabhupada was a pure devotee and a sincere soul who wants to preach and please Krishna, accordingly, Krishna also reciprocated to him by sending a sincere soul to him. And from there, the actual movement began. And the soul's natural function was to serve Krishna, and Krishna's natural way is to satisfy his pure devotee.
Thank you so much. It seems like America had a whole different setup and issue, and Moscow is like dangerous. America deeply dangerous, and there is like a life danger so much. Somehow Prabhupada finally planted the seed. I suggest everyone watch. We have this. We should have. I'll look for it. It's called salted bread, right? So you can search, and if you get a time, you can take a look. The inspiration, you can see that from even itself, you can see we're so desperate to take it. Krishna consciousness. So with this, anyone has any comments?
I was gonna say, this is just like another great example of everything else that we've been reading, where it's like, so I was reading about Ivan, who I guess became Ananta, was it Ananta Santi? That is?
Maybe I don't remember. Okay.
And so he was the only initiated devotee in Russia, right? And so he single-handedly, right? So Prabhupada meets him with 2 days left in Russia. And next thing you know, this guy goes on to be a devotee for the rest of his life and spreading it to thousands. Like, it's just, it doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a thread though. It makes no sense over and over again. How do these things happen? You know, like,
yeah,
it's more than luck, right?
right. It's the fire, you know, you just write one, that's the way it works actually. So Prabhupada is planting the seed in so many places. And, you know, that same thing is going to happen here also. All of your, you know, taking reading sincerely, you know, taking this moment very seriously. So only thing is we remain grateful for everything, because just like when the things are available so easily, we don't have an appreciation. We take it for granted. That said, they are very fortunate. You know, they've been put in difficult situations. They're craving for it now, and they know that what Krishna consciousness is bringing. And whereas others, especially Indian background, is very difficult, because they had this whole life, everything, society, community, and family, all this enjoyment, religiousness, everything was there. So they don't appreciate much, because we haven't seen how other part of the world people are going through. So very nice, thank you. So we can end it here with so we'll end it here. We'll meet tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Lilamrita ki jai. Vasudev is the host, so he's ending everything by himself.